Last year, I spent a month researching the Great Depression in America. Unemployment was at an all-time high, people were starving, but the recession itself didn't affect the crops. It didn't affect chickens or fish or apple trees or wheat. So why were people starving? Because the US government and American banks were seizing land from farmers who couldn't make their mortgage payments. They were foreclosing properties across the country that produced food for the people, and then they were largely unable to resell that land because the country was in a recession and no one could afford to buy it. This coronavirus pandemic also doesn't affect crops. It won't affect livestock. With extra hygiene measures, there are ways to make the production of these things safe for human consumption and will avoid potential contamination from workers. If the government can pump $1.5 trillion into the stock market, they can waive outstanding mortgages on any food production property. If the banks haven't saved up for a rainy day, if the banks don't have an emergency fund to tide them over for the next 6 months, well, that's just dang well irresponsible of them, isn't it? But in all seriousness, if the government doesn't forgive outstanding mortgages on farms and other food production properties, and if the government lets banks seize land that's otherwise being used to feed the American people, then make no mistake, if citizens of the US begin to starve en masse, that is not because of COVID-19. That is because of the government. That is because of the bank's selfish adherence to traditional capitalist structures over the lives of millions of people under a global emergency. Recessions like this mean that regular people, in market economic terms we're referred to as consumers, but I hate that designation because it assumes how I'm going to live my life and places a monetary value on me as a person in society above my contribution to the community. Recessions mean that regular people stop spending on unnecessary items. People focus on necessary items like food and utilities, and we stop buying stuff, which is, interestingly enough, exactly how we need to change our lifestyle if we want to combat global warming. Yes, I know global warming is primarily the responsibility of a handful of companies and manufacturers, but if we en masse stop supporting these manufacturers, they won't have anyone to sell to, and they'll have to shut down. We weren't able to do that collectively, intentionally before, but this may happen unintentionally now due to the inevitable recession that results from people losing their jobs on this kind of scale. But that doesn't have to mean mass starvation. We as a planet have the technology and the means to safely and healthily feed the entire world, even under these current circumstances. But if the governments in crisis stick to their unwavering capitalist economic system in the face of this global crisis, if they let banks foreclose on farms and other food production facilities, if they let banks foreclose on personal properties like they did in 2008, leaving thousands of people on the street while these perfectly good homes sit empty because no one can afford them, that is not the fault of COVID-19. That result is by human design. It is by design by people who do not have the capacity to think outside the box, and it is by design by people who value profit over human lives. Supporters of capitalism say that capitalism gives you freedom. What, the freedom to starve with no choice in the matter? The freedom to destroy the planet that the rest of us also live on? As we're seeing in other countries, the places that are most successfully curbing the spread of this virus are doing it not just due to fast and ingenuitive medical response, but also due to mass cooperation and community-mindedness on the part of the population. South Korea has a population of 51 million, over 100,000 square kilometers, and Italy has a population of 60 million, over 301,000 square kilometers. Both countries are mostly peninsular, with a border along the northern part of the country. Both countries had their first case around the same date, but look how Italy's cases have skyrocketed while South Korea has managed to flatten the curve. This is because South Korea has been strict about social distancing, and the population has followed guidelines responsibly and efficiently. Mattia Ferraresi writes, as of Friday night, 1,266 people have died in Italy due to the outbreak. So here's my warning for the United States. It didn't have to come to this. We of course couldn't stop the emergence of a previously unknown and deadly virus, but we could have mitigated the situation we're in now, in which people who could have been saved are dying. I, and too many others, could have taken a simple yet morally loaded action. We could have stayed home. What has happened in Italy shows that less than urgent appeals to the public by the government to slightly change habits regarding social interactions aren't enough when the terrible outcomes they are designed to prevent are not yet apparent. when they become evident, it's generally too late to act. I and many other Italians just didn't see the need to change our routines for a threat that we could not see. Italy has now been on lockdown since March 9th. It took weeks after the virus first appeared here to realize that severe measures were absolutely necessary. According to several data scientists, Italy is about 10 days ahead of Spain, Germany, and France in the epidemic progression, and 13 to 16 days ahead of the United Kingdom and the United States. That means those countries still have the opportunity to take measures that today may look excessive and disproportionate, yet from the future, where I am now, are perfectly rational in order to avoid a healthcare system collapse. The United States has some 45,000 ICU beds, and even in a moderate outbreak scenario, some 200,000 Americans will need intensive care. The way to avoid or mitigate all this in the United States and elsewhere is to do something similar to what Italy, Denmark, and Finland are doing now, but without wasting the few messy weeks in which we thought a few local lockdowns, cancelling public gatherings, and warmly encouraging working from home would be enough to stop the spread of this virus. We now know that wasn't nearly enough. Supporters of capitalism, especially American capitalist freedom, say that capitalism gives you freedom. No, that was bad. Don't do that.